Welcome back to History with Tim. In the first two parts of our series, we explored the origins of the Irish Civil War and the fierce battles that tore Ireland apart. Now in part 3, we're going to be discussing the aftermath and legacy. We turn our focus to the end of the conflict and the scars it left behind. With pro-treaty forces emerging victorious, the war's bitter end left deep wounds that would affect the country for generations. We'll examine the human costs, the political repercussions, and most importantly, the social impact on a nation still grappling with its divided past. We'll also look at how the Irish Civil War set the stages for further political division and shaped the Republic of Ireland as we know it today. Through stories of those who lived through it and the memory of that lingers, we'll uncover the lasting legacy of this dark chapter in Irish history. Join us as we conclude our deep dive into the Irish Civil War, examining how the echoes of the conflict continue to shape Ireland's identity and the future. We're going to pick up from where we were yesterday, just at Limerick Falls.
It was in the aftermath of this retreat that Liam Lynch made his fateful decision. With the conventional war lost, Lynch decided to return the organisation to its roots, splitting into small flying columns of around 35 men who'd operate as guerrillas, setting up ambushes and launching sneak attacks before melting away into the landscape. It was a style of fighting that the IRA was good at, but it was also one that, especially without broad...
Sorry, I didn't mute it. But that's actually good timing too. Something else that's going to happen is as the war continues on, you're going to see a lot of IRA. They're not the older veterans. They're young kids now. It's becoming younger men who want their chance at being part of this glorious war. So that's what's going to start happening at this point.
Civilian support would never lead to victory. In effect, all Lynch was doing was prolonging the Civil War beyond its natural endpoint, sucking Ireland into a cycle of revenge killings and assassinations that still leave scars to this very day. And this cycle would start with the most infamous assassination of all. On August the 22nd, Michael Collins headed west of Cork on an inspection tour. The war effectively won. As his car was passing the village of Beal-na-Blath at dusk, a small group of armed...
Beal-na-Blath. It's not Beal-na-Blath. It's Beal-na-Blath.
Armed men ambushed them. They could have gotten away, but Collins foolishly exited the car, gun in hand, and started to exchange fire. After a short battle, he was shot dead, the only casualty of the fight. The death of Michael Collins, at 31, robbed the...
Now, there's actually a crazy theory behind this. Sorry, I'm having issues with my foot. There's a crazy theory behind this, because they look at where he was shot, and some people think it was actually one of his own men who shot him at point-blank range. This is a very long-standing conspiracy. The idea was kind of, if Michael Collins and Liam Lynch both died, that meant the war would end. Because at this point, Arthur Griffith is dead. Like I said in, I think, yesterday's video, Michael Collins at this point is just a premier. He's in charge of the Free State government. He's the de facto leader until a new president can be elected. So the idea is, if everyone involved at the beginning of this is gone, it'll be easier just to pave over it. So the only person here that is alive by the end of this is going to be Eamon de Valera, ironic enough.
The provisional government, not only of one of its leading lights, but perhaps the only man who might have been able to end the Civil War sooner rather than later. As it was, the killings would continue for another 8 months, starting with 5 civilians gunned down in Westport when the IRA opened fire on a crowd holding mass for the murdered Collins. The final phase of the Irish Civil War was by far the most...
And to add to that, it was actually de Valera regretted the death of Collins. He did not want Michael Collins to die. He said that in the long span of history, the greatness of Michael Collins will always be remembered, and it will be remembered at my disposition or something like along those lines. Eamon de Valera, and this is what I mean about him being a good politician, but also the man was a realist. The man knew in history he was going to be remembered as the villain, because regardless of conspiracies or anything, Michael Collins was viewed as the man who tried to save Ireland, whereas Eamon de Valera will forever be remembered as the man who tore Ireland apart. And I know what you're saying, but Tim, he was elected president of Ireland. He was the president for a while, actually. He was almost like the Charles de Gaulle of Ireland. He was in power for a long time. True. But when historians now look back at it, we could say, I mean, de Valera, he was a good president and everything. But who is always the one pointed to for the Civil War? Who started the war? It was Eamon de Valera and his supporters in the IRA. So regardless of what he did as president, he's not remembered as the, at least around the world, he's not remembered for being at St. Stephen's Green during the Easter Rising. He's not remembered for being arrested during the Irish War of Independence and then escaping to America. He's not remembered even really for his presidency, with the exception of what he did in the closing days of World War II. He's remembered as the man who started the Civil War. And that's very important.
Most painful and damaging of all. With no one in any doubt that the pro-treaty side had won, all that was left to do was see how much violence the Republicans could inflict before standing down. And the grim answer was a lot. August to October saw a wave of attacks against Free State forces, sometimes involving hundreds of Republican fighters. Scores were killed. Yet fundamentally, it didn't change anything, just as Tom Barry's daring December takeover of towns like Carrick-on-Suir and Mullin-Abbott failed to recreate them.
Tom Barry was a famous flying column, Barry's column. They did the famous Kill Michael ambush, where Barry dressed like a British soldier and ambushed an entire column with his flying column, and he actually... It's remembered as one of the greatest victories during the War of Independence outside the battles in Dublin. But he sided with the anti-treaty.
The Munster Republic. There was just no getting around the fact that the Republicans were slowly running out of both men and ammo. Yes, they were killing a lot of National Army members, but the thing about professional armies is they can train up new soldiers. A volunteer group like the IRA falls apart once people stop volunteering, and by the end of 1922, Lynch wasn't just struggling to find new recruits, he was struggling to keep his current fighters from mass deserting. At the same time, the government was entrenching itself, growing in power and legitimacy with every passing day. In September, the new Dáil convened. Since the oath to the king meant anti-treaty leaders refused to take their seats, the Dáil easily passed army emergency powers legislation authorizing summary executions for captured IRA men, legislation that would eventually...
And this is where you're going to see a little difference from 1916. You know, in 1916, the summary executions of the leaders will be decried and seen as monstrous because, again, even though the Irish citizens were not happy about the rising, it was Englishmen killing Irishmen. Now the scenario is the Irish people have agreed to the treaty. So the Dáil of na hÉireann is a complete Irish body. The Irish Free State Army is an Irish army, technically, and all the government leadership is Irish. Yes, they are sworn to George V. They aren't sworn to David Lloyd George, though. They're not sworn to Westminster. They're just sworn to George V, the same way the Australian government today is sworn to Charles III. So what you have now is they are an autonomous country in everything except that oath. So what is happening is the Irish citizens, you're not betraying, it's not Irishmen being killed by a foreign power anymore. It's traitors being executed for betraying them, the people. And this is where the IRA starts collapsing, because the thing is, there was a time when the population would come out to try to save and try to rescue them when the British arrested them. The prisoners of the IRA that are being held, the IRA prisoners around the country, aren't being rescued. And in fact, the people are cheering on their executions. So yeah, the volunteers are falling apart, not only because they see it's pointless, but it's clear to them the public does not agree with them. So why fight on for a war that we're not going to win and the people don't want us to win? So it's a very, this is really endgame for the IRA.
See 77 rebels put to death. Alongside the stick, the Dáil also introduced a juicy carrot. Amnesty.
The Dáil, Simon. Not the Doyle. The Dáil. I love Simon, but it's pronounced the Dáil na hÉireann.
for anti-treaty fighters who surrendered and recognised the government. Perhaps it's no wonder Lynch was having trouble keeping his men loyal. To try and staunch the flow, Eamon de Valera, for his part, set up a separate republican government, yet it never held any territory, and even the IRA ignored its orders. By the time the Irish Free State was officially declared on December the 6th,
and that's the crazy thing too about it, is towards the end, Lynch wasn't even listening to de Valera. At this point, de Valera was just a voice screaming in the darkness in a weird way. He wanted to stem everything. He wanted to stop everything. He thought, if they can recognize me as the leader of the anti-treaty forces, maybe we can make a compromise somehow. And, and I believe in some way de Valera believed the Free State Army is strong, so if we can make a compromise with them, they can train the IRA, and now we're a better army to take on the English. But the reality, again, is the people are done. They don't want to fight anymore. Michael Collins said it best. This was a stepstone to the ultimate freedom. And de Valera at this point, he wants the bloodshed to stop too, but he doesn't want to look bad at the end of this. And that's what it really is about. It's about him. It's about self-preservation for him, but for people like Lynch and Barry and all those guys in the anti-treaty forces, they just want to win. They want to win, and they're not going to.
The Republicans all but finished. The last months of the war passed with few serious battles, but a string of atrocities and revenge killings. DAR member Sean Hales, for example, was assassinated on December the 7th, which led the government to execute 4 influential anti-treaty leaders, including Rory O'Connor and Liam Mellows. Yet even as the violence ground on, it was clear the end was coming. In early 1923, the Cork IRA notified its commanders that if it lost just 5 more men, it would be unable to carry on operations. Meanwhile, captured anti-treaty leaders like Liam Deasy begged their comrades.
Do you realize how bad that is? 5 more men they can't fill out. I believe the normal flying column was about 50 to maybe 70 men. If the Cork Brigade Division, if they lost 5 more men, they were not going to be able to function. That is how far Lynch's army had fallen, that they were not even going to be able to hold Cork. Cork, which used to go by the name, and I believe it still does, as the rebel county. This should be anti-treaty heaven for Lynch, but they're all exhausted too. They don't want to keep fighting either. As much as there was death and there was fighting and everything, the anti-treaty forces actually mostly just melted away because they didn't want to fight. They were tired. They didn't want to keep going, and they didn't see a point in continuing the fight.
To lay down arms, but it would take change at the top to make them listen. On April the 10th, 1923, Liam Lynch was killed on a mountainside in County Tipperary. In his place, Frank Aiken became the head of anti-treaty forces. One of his first moves was to declare a unilateral ceasefire. On April the 30th, Aiken announced the IRA would give up fighting. Nearly a month later, on May the 24th, he ordered all active volunteers to hide their weapons and return to civilian life. And just like that, the Civil War sputtered to an end. The next few months saw mass arrests of Republicans, including Eamon de Valera, until around 13,000 of them were held in jails. Yet while the government feared releasing them could restart the violence, in the end the ceasefire held. When de Valera was released in 1924, for example, it wasn't to resume the struggle, but to go into politics. After co-founding the Fianna Fáil party, it wound up winning the 1932 election. His pro-treaty opponents, meanwhile, would eventually form the basis for the Fine Gael, 20th century Ireland's other major political force. Today, a century after it began, the scars of the Irish Civil War have yet to fully heal. All told, the conflict is thought to have killed around 1,500 people, fewer than the War of Independence, but a far more impactful number in terms of lingering bitterness, of anger, of divisions left to fester away. Even now, the legacy of this dark period remains unsettled. Even de Valera's role is debated. Was he a hero or a stubborn fool who led Ireland into catastrophe? Well, we'll let you decide on that one. And that marks the end of our loose trilogy on Irish wars of the 20th century.
We're going to stop it there because, there's something that Simon just said that's such a valid point about this. I am generation separated from Ireland. My closest relatives to Ireland is my great-grandmother's parents on my father's side and my grandfather's grandparents on my mother's side, and my my mother's mother's mother was also from Ireland. Her husband was Belgian, but I'm separated enough. But I also, being raised in that culture, even if we didn't talk about it, we had a side in it in a weird way. So let me rewind. 7 years ago, my girlfriend at that time, her sister was dating a boy from Dingle, Ireland. Dingle, Ireland is in the west. It's kind of a remote area. It's actually one of the places where the Irish language is being is surviving. It's not extinct in those regions. Some places in that region, actually, Irish is the primary language. And I was showing my girlfriend the movie Michael Collins the first time. And as someone from Cork, Michael Collins is a hero to us, regardless. We might have not agreed with his politics, but Michael Collins is ours. He's from Cork. He's ours. It's the same thing, kind of like, like how people, like, you're born in, like, New York, so you're New York's. That's who you belong to. You're our person. That's what Michael Collins is. He's a figure for Cork. And I support Michael Collins' decisions he made, because the thing is, the fact that he was able to achieve what he was able to achieve was impressive. And at the end of the day, he was just saying, let's play the long game and we'll be free. And like I said, less than 15, 12 years later, they were. But in Dingle, and me and him had talked about this, he was like, no, he was wrong. 100% wrong. They should have kept fighting. And you don't really think about it, but this is something that is actually scarred into the Irish culture of Ireland. Not even like Irish Americans, but the culture of Ireland. There are people who have been raised to believe, oh, the Free State was a terrible idea. I don't know why they did it. Thank God we're free now, but, the North is still not part of us. But then there's people that are like, but what was the alternative? War with England? More fighting? More death? And, we look at these gentlemen, and what I always find hilarious when you look at, like, photos of this era, these guys are in a horrible civil war, but you can always rely on an Irishman to be giggling and smiling at a picture. But it's the Irish Civil War is a conflict that really reverberates through Irish history. Again, it's not something that's talked about. They don't like talking about it. It's a terrible period for the country. Brother killed brother, as most civil wars are. In the United States, we deify it a little more than other countries. England, they don't really talk about their civil war, and believe me, they've had more than us. But it's this moment that the Irish people, they don't want to talk about, but it exists in their world to this day. And, that's something I do plan to touch on when I'm over there next week. But with that said, thank you all for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Please go give Simon a follow. He does great content. He's a little crass. I'll admit that. But he's great. He makes great content, and him and his team work really hard. Please try to donate to our Patreon. Join that rank system. We got privates. We got sergeants. We have captains. We have colonels. And if you want to join the Imperial staff, you become a marshal. But also, if you're able to, please donate to our national parks. They desperately need help right now. And not only American national parks around the world, to keep these facts and these stories alive. And with that said, please like, share, and comment. If you're new to the channel or you're returning and not yet, please hit that red button to subscribe. Press the bell icon to stay updated on all of our content. And with that said, thank you for joining me, friends, and we will see you in the next one.